the imagery of our pilgrim songs turn again toward the destination. As we've been learning from the Songs of Ascent how to pray, we see the psalmist become inspired by the journey itself, reflecting on God's presence. Psalm 125 is a prayer of confidence and God's enduring protection. As this song leader surveys the landscape, his sightseeing becomes theological. Let's read from the NIV. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken, but endures forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, both now and forevermore. The scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous, for then the righteous might use their hands to do evil. Lord, do good to those who are good, to those who are upright in heart. But those who turn to crooked ways, the Lord will banish with the evildoers. Peace be on Israel. What image is more stable than that of a mountain? With the exception of the cataclysmic event of volcanic activity, mountains are the image of stability. They stand like eternal sentinels, fixed, immovable. To fully engage the imagery the psalmist has in mind here, however, we must appeal to the geography of Jerusalem. For people who live in more mountainous regions of the world, we may conjure images of snow-capped peaks, sharp rocky edges scraping the sky, or towering walls of greenery, pines rustled by howling high-elevation winds. Though Israel is home to some fairly tall mountains such as Hermon, which will make an appearance in our later exploration of Psalm 133, reaching over 9,000 feet at its wide and snowy summit, the mountains that surround Jerusalem are less dramatic. It's more understandable why the Hebrew word for mountain and hill are the same exact word. Stirred by the imagery of Jerusalem, the psalmist surveys the hill country of his beloved pilgrimage destination and finds the image of security. The area is surrounded by these gently rolling hills, these mountains of Jerusalem. The landscape leads him to worship. God surrounds his people, just as these mountains do. This image would draw to mind some of these strategic military significance we'll explore in a moment, but it also draws to mind permanence. These hills hugged this region for millennia, and even today continue to do so. Did you know that God has that kind of station with you? Do you remember that often enough? Would you pray this prayer of security with this psalmist? As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds you. Looking at the topography of the city of Jerusalem, it's helpful in drawing to mind this poetic metaphor of God's presence. Mount Moriah, aka the Temple Mount, sits around 770 feet in elevation. The Kidron Valley below bottoms out around 620, give or take. The mountain we know as Zion, in fact, is a hill by most standards, about 150 feet tall. Interestingly enough, this Temple Mount is not Zion exactly. Zion is the hill just across from Moriah. It's quite confusing. As Easton's Bible Dictionary puts it, Zion was the southeastern hill of Jerusalem. It became a shorthand name for Jerusalem, where David built his palace. Yet throughout the poetic books of the Bible, Zion refers to the Temple Mount itself, as the IVP Bible Dictionary suggests. Which Zion? Which hill does the psalmist employ for the purpose of simile? There was a fortress there when David took the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was actually a new addition to Israel's holdings for David's generation, as it was occupied by a group of people called the Jebusites. The conquest took until David's day, way after the era of conquest led by Joshua, to be fulfilled. The momentous event is recorded in 2 Samuel 5 and 1 Chronicles 11. Considering Israel held the land all around their city, it goes to show just how impenetrable their fortress was. The Jebusites were so confident in their security that they taunted David's forces by stationing blind and deaf guards on the ramparts. Can you imagine that kind of confidence? Yet the fortress had one vulnerability, which archaeologists have confirmed. The city was built on top of its water supply, a brilliant strategy, the spring of Gihon. However, the spring was accessed by a tunnel that went directly into the city. Using this tunnel, Joab, one of David's men, infiltrated the city, paving the way for David's forces to capture the otherwise impenetrable city. Of course, the account gives God the credit, for no wall can keep out the Lord of hosts. So, was this impenetrable fortress what became known as the City of David, the mountain that drew the eyes of the psalmist? Or was it the Temple Mount just across the Kidron Valley, which became the place God dwelled? Which hill does he have in mind? I'm not sure I can answer that, but they seem conflated here, as they are throughout prophetic and poetic writings. Perhaps the whole city complex, the temple and the palace adjacent, is drawn to mind. Zion is the place where God reigns on his throne in the Holy of Holies, and where his anointed reigns on the throne of David. The otherwise impenetrable city and the temple built to remind of God's immovable presence are the image of security. A kingdom is only as unshakable as its king. The Jebusites hoped in their own strength. David hoped in God's. This is a prayer that invites confidence. Putting trust in God makes one as immovable as a mountain. But it often feels like we have more Jebusites than Israelites in our own lives. If trusting in God makes us immovable, why do wicked people seem so anchored, fixed in arrogance, unbudging presences that complicate life for others? Who comes to mind when you pray with this psalmist this phrase, "The scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous, for then the righteous might use their hands to do evil"? Have you ever had an oppressive teacher, supervisor, parental figure, or anyone with authority that you felt used their position selfishly? The psalmist sees the threat as contagious. Culture, for him, seems to start at the top. In the days of monarchy, it's easy to conceive why. Just thumb through the book of Kings, taking the spiritual pulse on the nation of Israel. When the kings humbly acknowledge God, things are just better. And when they don't, things get bad, really bad. Whether you are reflecting about this psalmist's observation from a personal level or on a broad level, I think it's a relatable sentiment. When we are under the stewardship of the wicked, it's not good for anyone. Bad influence is real. The psalmist views the threat to the immovable mountain as crooked leadership. And what is the cure? Does the psalmist exclaim his intent to pick up sword and charge these wicked rulers? No. This is a theme we will continue to explore, particularly with Psalm 129. For now, it will suffice to say that the prayers of the Psalms do not ignore injustice, nor should we. It is a concern on the front of their minds, thus on the tip of their tongues. God wants you to notice it too, and he wants you to pray about it, not necessarily run into battle. Though it's worth saying that Bonhoeffer, who treasured the Psalms as the very prayer book of Christ, went to his death after being caught in an assassination plot against Hitler. For now, let's ruminate on the psalmist's strategy here, to implore God's activity and to remember the impermanence of the wicked. In God's kingdom, there is stability of the upright in heart. The wicked won't always be here, no matter how invincible they seem. We then, in this prayer of security and stability, can let the topography of God's kingdom shape our confidence, learning to rest assured in the permanence of God's presence.